welcome to The Guitar Effect. My name's Rob. In this video I'm going to be talking about this. This is the Cab Box from Joyo, and this is now my cab sim device of choice. So what this is this simulates the power amp, cabinet and microphone that you would use live or in the studio to stop you from needing to use microphones, cabs and power amps and stuff like that. Basically you combine this with a preamp to make a direct guitar sound. So the first thing we should do is take a listen to it in a track doing just that, right? So I'm going to use 3 different guitars, a clean, a crunch and a heavy in one of our tracks, and you can have a listen to how it sounds. So here it is. Give 3 pretty distinct guitar sounds using the 2 notes revolt, which was my preamp that I used into it, and combining a different cab, mic and power amp with each of the different Fender, Marshall and Soldano sounds that are available from that preamp, and that's how I use it. So just to talk about it a sec, right? So as I mentioned, this is a cabinet, mic and power amp simulator, right? The guys in Joyo sent this out to me, so this is not a sponsored video, but I do get to keep the pedal, so I have to say that, but all these opinions are my own, and you can see when I go into the audio demo that everything I say about it, it's able to do. So how it works is, what I really like about this is it's completely hands-on, right? There's a lot of different apps, or different devices, pedals out there that do this job, either preamp and power amp and cab, or else just power amp and cab, which is what this is. And they require an app or they require an editor to really get the most out of them. The only thing you really need the editor with this is to load your own IORs. And incidentally, I haven't loaded my own IORs because the IORs or the actual cabinet simulations that are on board on this actually sound really good to my ears, so I don't feel like I need an IOR. So what it is you have, like, I think it's 10 microphones, about 20 cabs, and 6 power amp simulations, right? And that's like EL34, EL84, 6L6, 6V6, and 5 actually I think, and EL84, right? And it's really, really good. It does its job really, really well. So the ins and outs are really interesting in this. So first of all, there is an input where you will take your preamp signal and plug it in. There's a thru. So what the thru will be used for is, say you wanted to use a preamp and this to go to the front of house via this XLR output, you could use a thru to plug into the effects return of an onstage amp and use the cab and power amp of the onstage amp, which is great because the thru doesn't take any of the processing from this. It just takes a signal that comes in from the preamp and sends it out. So you could simultaneously run this to a cab on stage via the effects return or a power amp and cab. And you could use this for your front of house sound, which is really, really cool. Then there's a jack output or an XLR output to send wherever you want to send the process signal to. Then there is simply a down and up foot switch. They cycle through different presets, right? There's 127 presets on it. There's a ground lift switch for the XLR input. And then there's a master volume knob and there's an encoder here. So you can cycle through, it's like, those indented things where it clicks as you turn it around, and it's also a push button. And that's what you use to navigate the menus. And then there's 5 buttons along the front, and this is what I really like about this. This is why it doesn't need an app. It's not touchscreen or anything, but it works perfectly well. So there is a power amp section where you can control like the type of tubes that you're using. You can control the input level to the power amp. You control the output level of the power amp and the presence. So really, really useful stuff. Then there's a cab mic where you can cycle through the different cabs and cycle through the different microphones. And then there's like, the usual sort of, is the mic in the center or is it off to the side? There is a microphone level with different controls like that. Then there's 3 different types of EQ. There's a guitar EQ, a bass EQ, and a parametric EQ. And then there's a save button, so you get your preset the way you want it, and you can save it into a specific location, and a home button that brings you back to the home screen. Everything you need to manipulate the sound to get it the way you want it is right here in these buttons and this encoder knob. It's really, really great. I don't need any apps or menus or anything like that. It works really, really well. It's about €200, which I think is pretty good for what it can do. Then the last thing is, it has a MIDI in. It has a full 5-pin MIDI in. Now what this means is, any preamp that has multiple channels that has MIDI out, you can send a MIDI cable into this, set up however many different IOR sections, or IOR presets I say, not IOR, cab sim or indeed IOR presets that you want on this. So for example, my Fender sound on my Revolt has one cab, my Marshall has a different cab, and my Soldana has a different cab. And I can use MIDI that when I switch channels, it switches the correct power amp, cab and mic sim for the particular amp I'm running. Brilliant. A lot of units that are kind of in this price range don't have that MIDI functionality, and I think that's something that majorly sets this apart. So that's it. That's what it does. I guess the thing we should do now is have a listen to the audio demo. So here you go. Okay, so there's a number of different things I need to talk about here, kind of in order, right? And the first thing is, what is the purpose of, in this case, the cab box? So the cab box is a cab, sim and IOR loader. But what that actually means is it replaces a speaker cabinet, it replaces a power amp, and it replaces a microphone, okay? And so in order to demonstrate that, you need to have a preamp to put into it, in effect, right? Because it doesn't affect you, it doesn't replace your amplifier, as in like, whether you're using a Fender or a Marshall or a Vox or anything like that. It does replace speaker cabinets, which are generally associated with those amplifiers, but the key thing is there's no preamp. So say you were using in this case, I had 3 amps. I had a Fender, a Marshall and a Soldano, okay? So the reason I say those 3 amps is because, as you can see from the inset here, I have a preamp running into the cab box, and the preamp I have is a 2-note revolt. And what that is a amp simulator, okay? So it is a tube amp simulator that has a tube in it that simulates a Fender Bassman, a Marshall Plexi and a Soldano SLO 100. Roughly, they're the kind of the sounds that are based on. It's not trying to emulate them exactly, and neither, by the way, do I care what amps it's exactly trying to emulate. It's good to know what amps it's kind of trying to emulate, so you know what the general sound is going to be. But I'm not someone who's trying to nail the sound of any amplifier. I'm trying to get sounds that I like, that I can use to make the music I want to make. Now, the Revolt has an analog cab sim out, which you can just see is in the back here. It's an XLR sticking out the back of the you might not be able to see it actually, but there's an XLR out. And what that is just an analog, like EQ'd output that simulates the sound of a speaker. So if you take the sound of a preamp and put it directly into an interface with a PA, it has a very fizzy, full range sound, whereas a guitar speaker has a much narrower frequency band, which is why guitar speakers sound the way they do. So what they do is they put an XLR output on the back of the Revolt that simulates the sound of a speaker, okay, just with an analog EQ, right? And then what I've also done is I've taken a separate output from the back of the Revolt and I've plugged it into the cab box. Now, first thing I'm going to do is show you the sound of 3 different preamps using that analog speaker output to show you why you could perceivably make the decision that you needed a speaker simulator, right? Okay, so here is the Fender, like, supposed to be basement, but just kind of generic Fender kind of style channel with the emulated output that's on the Revolt. So this is not the cab box, this is just the analog output on the Revolt. And here is the Marshall style crunch channel. And here is the Soldano style lead channel. Okay, so that's a perfectly, to me anyway, usable sounds. I do think that the clean in this instance and the Soldano lead channel sound a little bit better than the crunch channel. The crunch channel is pushing the mids a little too much and a little bit lacking in bass. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the same three sounds but using the cab simulation, the power amp simulation and the mic simulation from the cab box, right? And so I know what I'm talking about, I'm actually going to mute the onboard Revolt output and turn on the cab box output on my interface in the room so I can hear the difference myself. So there is the Fender style cab. Now what I'm doing here is I'm using a 2x12 matchless cab. There's no reason I'm using this cab other than I cycled through it with the Revolt and found the one I like. It's a little bit more refined. Interestingly enough, this setup has no reverb because the cab box doesn't have any reverb on it, nor does the Revolt. So it's very dry. So that's the 2x12 matchless cab, and then if I go to the crunch setting. So this is using a 1960 greenback style Marshall. We're mentioning these are not IRs, these are standard cabs that come with the cab box. And here is the Soldano with, funnily enough, a Soldano style 4x12 cab model from the cab box. Now, interestingly enough, that needs to be made louder. And how you do that is you go into the power amp and you turn the output up. So you scroll through to the output, you click it, and you wind the output up. And then I just save it. I'll come into the controls of this in a second, but yeah. Okay, so if I then go back, it'll bring back to the home screen. So there, the three cabs, and again, they're not IRs, they're just standard cabs from the cab box that I've chosen to pair with the sounds of this preamp. Just going to check my tuning quickly. Okay, so that's how you can hear the difference between the two sets of sounds, right? I think the cab box, I mean, it's a subjective thing, but I prefer the sound with the individual cabinets from the cab box. However, I think if I was going to play live with this setup, I'd probably only use the one cab off the cab box rather than switch them. But I think for getting different guitar sounds, for when I'm trying to record things here in the studio, having those cabs loaded up. And again, I could do this in the DAW, but I prefer to commit to my sounds outside of before I do a take, so I know the sound that I'm trying to add to the track. And so I like to use this setup where all of my sound is being created by hardware and none of it by software. I don't mind adding EQs and compressors and stuff, or rather a mix engineer doing that, but I like to create my guitar sound as if I was miking a cab in the studio and like committing to that sound. So I prefer the three different amps in effect that I get by having three different preamps, cabinets, mic simulators with this setup. So the next thing I want to talk about is Why would you choose the Cab Box specifically over any other? Because this video isn't about cab sims, it's about the Cab Box. So why would you choose the Cab Box over other IO or cab sims or mic sims, power amp sims? First of all, I looked up the price of it because as I mentioned earlier on, Joyo sent me this for free. So I wasn't sure what the price of it was. So I looked it up and it's about 190 euros from what I can tell. And it's pretty competitive, right? And also it has a lot of features for that price point that do exactly what I need to do. That's the first thing. It's affordable and it's got all the ins and outs that I need. Secondly, if I wanted to, I could load my own IORs onto it, which I don't want to. I like the sounds of the cabinets that are on board, so I've no need to load IORs onto it. And then the other thing is, say for example, I reviewed recently the 2 Notes Opus, which is the sort of companion to the Revolt that does their cabinet simulation. You can load your own IORs, there's power amp simulation, there's EQ, there's reverb, which is really useful on it. But a lot of, and the interface to control it is really beautiful, but you can only really meaningfully control it. There is some knobs and stuff on the top of it, but you can only really control it with an app or with plugging it into your computer. I don't really want to do that. I prefer to use hands-on controls on devices if I can, and all of the control on this, it does come with an app that you can use to do all the editing, and you can also use it to load your IORs, and you will need it if you want to load IORs. I don't need it, because all the control I need is right here in the face of the unit. And then the most important thing to state is a lot of cab sim boxes that are around this kind of price range don't have MIDI. And the fact that this has MIDI means I can switch the cabs, as I showed you, as I cycled through them, the cab changes on the unit. That's happening as a result of the MIDI cable that's going from the back of the Revolt into the side of the Cab Box. And that allows me to switch the presets as I need them. And that's something that's a huge thing here, right? So the last thing I want to do now is just show you the specific features of the Cab Box and what you can control within each cab. Okay, so here's what the controls that I mentioned that are available to you are able to do. So there's some buttons across the front. It's not a touch screen, heaven forbid, but not a touch screen. There's just some buttons across the front where you can edit the different parameters that you might want to edit, right? And these parameters are, first of all, you got power amp. So within the power amp, there's an input level. The more you drive the input level, in theory at least, the dirtier it gets, right? I just want to make sure I'm still listening to the right thing. Okay, so with that input, I can go in, just scroll to it. Well, first I'll talk about tube. So there's the ability to change the tube size of the power amp. Because this is a Marshall side sound, I'm using the EL34, but I can put in the EL84. It's quite nice. That would move you into like a 1974X territory. Like an 18-watt Marshall. If you were using a Vox style power amp, that's what you would use. There's also 6L6, probably more robust, kind of low end. Less fizzy tops, more robust low end. More American sounding. Then there's 6V6, bit softer. Kind of Fender Deluxe reverb type thing, and then you're back to EL34. So they're the different tube options that you have. So they can shape the like responsiveness, EQ, compression. I'm just going to stick with EL34, and then if I click that off, I can go down to the input. Now if I wind, back to the input. If I wind that input back a lot, say halfway, it'll change the characteristic of the power amp. It's a bit clean. I prefer it up around two thirds. There. And then I click that and go into the presence and make the thing brighter or darker. I like super high frequency, so if I want to make that darker, you have to really turn this knob a lot of times. It's darker, or I can wind it back up. I like it right around the middle. And then I go over to the output, which does exactly what you think it does. Controls the volume. It's pretty subtle, which gives you nice control actually, which is great. So that's what you can do with the power amp section of the unit, right? And then if I go over to cab mic, here we have, you can turn the cab mic on or off, obviously. You can choose the cabinet, which we've already chosen. And then there's a mic simulation session. This makes dramatic difference to things. So if I click this on, I've gone from an MD, remember that, the 421, which I presume is a ribbon mic. This is the 441. The U47, which is the Neumann condenser mic. The U87. Bottom end all goes away. Rode NT1. Starts to come back a little bit. MXL 201P. 2003. C3000. Very scooped. C4000B. There's a massive amount of different, that's the one I like. Massive amount of different mics you can choose from. Then there's also this, if I click this and go around to, there's a mic volume which does the second thing, and there's this cab edge thing. So the more you twist this knob, the more it moves to or from the edge of the speaker, or the center of the speaker, I should say. So this should theoretically make it darker. I'm liking this right on the edge. Okay, and then the last thing you have is you have this EQ section. It has many different types of EQ. It has a graphic G, it has graphic B. That's obviously graphic bass frequencies, and graphic B being for bass, graphic G being for guitar. Then it has parametric EQ off. So philosophy thing here, I always leave EQs off because it's too tweakable in effect, is what I mean. I don't like having an EQ on. It makes stuff too hard. What I find is you put an EQ on and you'll love the sound you get with an EQ there and then. You'll come back an hour later and be like, I don't like that. It's too specific in its capacity to change the tone. I don't use an EQ pedal live. I use one for a boost, I tell a lie, but it's only just to push the mids on a volume boost for solos. I don't use it to shape my tone. I use the EQ on my guitar and the EQ on my amp to get my tone, and that's what I'm mimicking here. I don't use an EQ, but if you want to, it's there. And then you have a save button to save it, and then you can just hit the home button to bring it back to the home screen. Everything you need to edit the unit is right there in front of you, and I really like that. There's no app there is an app should you need it, but it's not required. So in that respect, I really like this. So yeah, there you go. The Cab Box is my IR loader or cab sim of choice. So there you go. I think if you're running a preamp, and especially one that has the capacity to send a MIDI signal out when you switch channels, this is a really, really useful thing. I love the way it's so tactile, actual buttons and knobs and stuff, and that everything you need is right there in the front of the unit. It doesn't have a touch screen, but I really just don't think that that's in any way relevant if everything you can do can be done easily, which it can. It's built well. I think it's, a relatively pretty pedal. You can cycle up and down manually, or you can bypass by hitting those two switches. It has the input, it has a through, it has a standard 9-volt power supply, it has a phones, it has a micro USB because it's a little bit older, so it doesn't have a USB-C, which is a little bit annoying, but it's not a big deal. And then it has the XLR output, so it has everything you need to run your cab, power amp simulator and microphone sim to the front of house with your preamp. So really, really, really happy with this. Thanks so much to Joyo for sending it out. The Cab Box, what does it say? Cab sim and IR loader. All right, so there you go. Thanks to Joy for sending it out. Any questions, throw them in the comment section down below. I'll be happy to answer them. If you've watched this far, as always, I say thank you. And if you have watched this far and you found the video useful, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel out massively. And yeah, I'll see you in another video again soon. Take it easy. Bye.